Okay, so The Old Guard is technically about immortal warriors. But calling it just an action movie is like calling loneliness just being alone. Because what this film actually captures, in a way that's both brutal and beautiful, is what it means to keep going when you've already lived too long, lost too much, and seen everything fall apart more times than you can count. And that's the part that hits different. We talk about resilience, purpose, moving on. But we don't talk enough about what happens when you've been resilient for so long that you forget why you started. When purpose feels like a burden. When moving on just means watching everyone you love disappear. So instead of reviewing this movie scene by scene, I want to talk about 5 brutal life lessons The Old Guard nails about loss, purpose, connection, and what it actually takes to keep fighting when you've already lost everything that mattered. The first lesson is the hardest one. You don't get to choose when your purpose ends. Andy has been fighting for thousands of years. She saved countless lives. She's done the work. And she's exhausted. She wants to stop. She wants to rest. But the world doesn't care. The mission doesn't care. People still need saving, and she doesn't get to quit just because she's tired. And honestly, that's the most frustrating part of having purpose. You think there's an end point. You think if you just do enough, give enough, sacrifice enough, you'll earn the right to stop. But you won't. Because purpose isn't a debt you pay off. It's a responsibility that doesn't end until you do. I've seen this in smaller ways. Parents who thought they'd be done raising kids only to become caretakers for aging parents. People who built careers, retired, and realized they still felt empty without the work. Friends who thought they'd healed from trauma only to have it resurface years later. Because the truth isn't the hard part. The hard part is accepting that some things don't have endings. Some responsibilities don't have expiration dates. Some battles don't get won. They just get fought. So the brutal takeaway? Stop waiting for permission to rest. If you need to stop, stop. But don't expect the world to tell you it's okay. Lesson 2. The people you save won't remember you, and you have to be okay with that. In the movie, Andy and her team have saved millions of lives across centuries, and almost no one knows. No one remembers. No one thanks them. They do the work in the shadows, and history forgets them. And that's not fiction. That's life. Most of the good you do in the world will go unnoticed. The person you helped won't remember your name. The crisis you prevented won't make headlines because it never happened. The sacrifice you made will be invisible because no one saw you make it. I've done this. We all have. Stayed late to fix something no one noticed was broken. Gave advice that changed someone's life and they never mentioned it again. Held someone together during their worst moment and they moved on without looking back. It's not that people are ungrateful, it's that impact is invisible. The best help you give is the kind that makes people think they did it themselves. But here's the thing, if you need recognition to keep going, you'll burn out. Because recognition is rare, gratitude is fleeting. And most of the time, the only person who will know what you did is you. So the real question isn't, will people remember? It's, can you keep going even if they don't? Lesson 3. Loneliness isn't about being alone. It's about being the only one who understands. Andy isn't alone. She has a team. She has Booker, Joe, Nikki, Niall, but she's still lonely. Because she's the oldest. She's seen the most. She's carried the weight the longest. And no one else can fully understand what that feels like. And that's the loneliest kind of loneliness. You can be surrounded by people and still feel completely isolated. Not because they don't care, but because they can't relate. They haven't been where you've been. They haven't lost what you've lost. They haven't carried what you've carried. I felt this. Sitting in a room full of people, laughing, talking, and feeling completely disconnected. Not because I didn't like them, but because the things I was dealing with were so far outside their experience that I couldn't even explain it. And the worst part? You can't fix it by talking more. Because some experiences create a gap that words can't bridge. Some pain is so specific that only someone who's lived it can understand it. So the brutal truth? You will go through things that no one around you will fully get. And that's not their fault. It's just reality. Lesson 4 might be the most depressing. The people you love will leave, and you'll have to keep going anyway. Booker loses his family. Andy loses Lycon. Niall loses her old life.
And they don't get to stop and grieve properly. They don't get closure. They just have to keep moving. Because the mission doesn't pause for grief. And that's the most unfair part of life. You don't get to stop when you lose someone. Bills still come, work still happens, responsibilities still exist. The world keeps spinning, and you're expected to spin with it, even when you feel like you're falling apart. I've watched people lose parents and go back to work the next week, lose relationships and still show up to family dinners, lose dreams and still smile through conversations like nothing happened. Not because they're strong, because they have to be. Because life doesn't give you the luxury of falling apart when it's convenient. And the worst part? People will expect you to move on faster than you're ready. They'll ask if you're okay, and when you say yes, they'll believe you, because it's easier than sitting with your pain. But here's the thing, you don't move on from loss. You just learn to carry it, and some days it's lighter, and some days it crushes you. And both are okay. The last lesson is the one that stays with me the most. The only way to survive endless loss is to find meaning in the fight itself. By the end of the movie, Andy realizes she's not fighting because she'll win. She's not fighting because people will remember. She's fighting because the fight itself is the point. Because showing up matters. Because trying matters, even when it feels pointless. And that's the hardest lesson of all. Because we want guarantees. We want to know that our effort will pay off, that our sacrifice will matter, that our pain will lead to something better. But it won't. Not always. Sometimes you fight and lose. Sometimes you give everything and it's not enough. Sometimes you do the right thing and no one notices. And you have to be okay with that. Because the alternative, giving up, checking out, stopping, that's worse. I've had to learn this the hard way. With projects that failed. With relationships that ended. With dreams that didn't work out. And at some point, I realized the outcome doesn't determine the value. The effort does. The showing up does. The trying does. Because the fight itself is the meaning. The struggle itself is the point. And if you're waiting for a happy ending to justify the pain, you'll be waiting forever. So yeah, the Old Guard is technically about immortal warriors. But really? It's about what it means to keep going when you're exhausted. To keep fighting when no one's watching. To keep loving when you know you'll lose them. To keep showing up when the world forgets you were ever there. Which is brutal, but also kind of necessary. Because the alternative, giving up because it's hard, that's not strength. That's just surrender with better branding. If this movie hit you the way it hit me, let me know. And if one of these lessons felt a little too close to home, well, you're not alone. That's kind of the point.